Believe me, as Jim Flaherty always said, and now I know very well what he was talking about, we don't miss Ottawa. And every day out of Ottawa is a good day, and it's always great to be home here. But how did life change on October 22nd? It did to some extent. I mean, I was in the room with my colleagues, with the opposition in another room across the hall. We heard all this gunfire. We don't have our cell phones. We don't have any communication when we're in a caucus meeting. So we had no idea who was doing the shooting. And you initially assume the worst, that this is multiple attackers, that they have automatic weapons, and they will soon be at the door. So we reacted, as you saw, smartly, and we have a lot of several ex-police, ex-military in our caucus, and I think we would have been as well prepared as unarmed people can be. But that wasn't what happened. You know, that gunfire, every shot that we heard, apart from perhaps the initial one, was from our defenders. The only person who lost his life, you know, unfortunately, that the tragedy happened at all, was the attacker. We all then experienced this enormous outpouring of support for Corporal Nathan Cirillo. I was on the bridge here on Harwood. I'm sure many of you were as well. And the same for Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent. Very moving, huge church service in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. I think it actually ended up showing how strong this country is. We know, we're proud not to have had terrorist attacks recently, but we also know we're not immune. We had Air India, we had the FLQ, we had Irish terrorism not so very long ago. You know, at every point in our history, we had the Toronto 18, fortunately, whose attacks were prevented. But the reaction from Canadians was mature, it was strong, it was proud and patriotic, and I think we should be extremely proud of our fellow citizens, of our law enforcement, and above all, of our military for the mature way that this has been handled and the mature way that we are reacting. We're not going to overreact in legislation, in law enforcement measures, but we are going to stop underreacting. We are going to do the things we know are necessary to make sure a terrible new round of violence and cruelty in Iraq and beyond in the Middle East doesn't affect us in Canada more than it already has.
I've seen more Canadian flags since that event. Sir, go ahead.
Thanks for coming, Chris. My name is Jerry Anderson, president and founder of Logicon Solutions. We're actually a software development company working in the new economy, and yes, we build software robots. So my compliments to you and the team at Ottawa in building the FedDev functionality. We do see that. However, I have a couple questions. One is, as a person who invests in a lot of IT capital, but also works with a lot of IT investors, what about the return on those investments? And as well, as we talk today about prosperity, as I advise all our clients around the globe, what gets measured gets managed. So what are we doing to possibly look at raising per capita incomes or driving wealth for everyone in this room?
Yeah. No, great questions. I mean, for businesses, you know, we leave it to you to assess your return on investment and the return on the investments we as governments make that benefit you. We've reduced taxes in countless ways. We've improved our tax competitiveness for businesses sharply, as I mentioned. And there are literally benefits that some businesses aren't aware of. Accelerated capital cost write-off is one of them. But there are many more in, unfortunately, a complex tax system, but one that really is geared to benefit business. How do we measure the return on investment from FedDev and from our other federal investments? It is difficult. And especially when you have new programs, you don't get a a measurement in 1 year. You get an impression of what the impact has been. But we want to measure these things relentlessly. And one of the best ways of measuring them is feedback from you. Has this worked or not? Are you able to apply for this or not? Why haven't you been able to benefit from this fund? Why haven't we in Durham been able to get 100 million instead of 28 or 30 million? We want to have that discussion. And we will take steps, as we have done for the whole research funding framework, so critical into innovation. You know, SRED wasn't working as well as we thought. We've reformed it. We think it's working much better now. But we want to hear from you where we need to go first. How do we raise per capita incomes? By having a strong, the strongest private sector in the world, geared towards domestic success, but also towards exporting and global success. Our free trade agreement supports that. Our tax system supports that. Our financial stability and return to balance support that. And then our workforce, our talented Canadian human capital has to support that. That's obviously our educational institutions working together with all the training initiatives that we're doing. You know, there is a challenge here. We still have jobs. Talk to any technology company, you probably do yourself, in the GTA today, whether it's big ones like CGI or Oracle, they have, or IBM, they have 200, 300 jobs today in the GTA they can't fill. And we don't want to point the finger at our educational institutions. We know they're trying to train people for those jobs, but we need to do more. Training inside enterprises, training in innovative ways, to bring people up to those very high levels that are needed to do the job to drive the economy forward.
One other question, and I'm a big believer because our company isn't big enough to invest or pay for the training it requires for the new economy. Is there a program or something to triple or quadruple the investments in, say, Dr. McTiernan's organization or the key education sectors? Because part of when I did a lot of global consulting and looked at other clusters throughout North America, the heart of it was a very strong university and college base. And so is there a plan coming into, and hopefully within the Durham region, to quadruple the investment, not only in capital dollars, but operating expenses to allow them to train the people? Because my company and all my fellow entrepreneurs in the high-tech industry can't afford to train these people.
Sure. No, and we've made a big investment in education, perhaps the biggest by federal governments in recent decades, outside of wartime. But we haven't changed the Constitution. You know, it is still post-secondary education and education itself a provincial responsibility, so the main investments will come from there. We have increased federal transfers to Ontario for all fields, social transfer, health transfer, et cetera, by 60% over the past 8 years. So there is more federal support, but the decisions and priorities are ultimately taken by a provincial government. On top of their funding, though, we have the Centres of Excellence, which have helped us here in Durham. We have Canada Research Chairs. We have NSERC, and et cetera. All of the funding for science, technology, research, and commercialization, National Research Council, operating on a new basis now, that are under the purview of Industry Canada and the Honourable Ed Holder, the new Minister of State for Science and Technology. So we're trying to do our part, but we agree with you. We want to see more training happening. We want to see more businesses able to train within their walls, and we want to help small and medium-sized businesses get the people that they actually need. We also want to work together to attract businesses and large employers to come to Canada and to come to Durham region. When I hear during the Prime Minister's visit to China just a couple of days ago that Jack Ma from Alibaba wants to set up a campus in Canada, and I think he mentioned Vancouver, I asked myself, why don't we talk to Jack Ma, about coming into the 407 corridor or coming alongside UIT, Durham College. That's the global framework we need to be thinking in terms of.
Yes, is this on? Minister Alexander, one of the economic development goals we have is business retention, especially in advanced manufacturing. So one of the companies we have in Whitby is a 300-person steel manufacturing company. So what we find with that particular industry is that offshore manufacturers are buying scrap metal, shipping it across the oceans, taking it to their manufacturing facility, turning it into steel, and then shipping it back at landed prices that are pretty darn competitive, if not below what's being manufactured domestically. So the question I have for you is particularly with regard to government procurement projects. Would the government look at the impact of greenhouse gas emissions in the procurement pricing process so that domestic manufacturers can be considered from that perspective, which is job retention, obviously research and development opportunities as they look to become more competitive, also assessment growth for municipalities. And if that was part of the procurement process, certainly that would be an advantage. Your government has GHG emissions targets. Should we be looking at that as part of the procurement process? Thank you.
Well, thanks for the question. I'd love to take that question back and discuss it with my colleagues. That's something that would personally interest me. I sat on the Steel Caucus because of our role in steel before becoming a minister, and know the pressures that the industry's under. I mean, we're saddened by the news in Hamilton, but we also know there is growth elsewhere when we get things right. And one of the things we need to get right is our international trade law and our anti-dumping actions. We have had success on that front, addressing some issues from China recently. I was involved as a diplomat in many of the anti-dumping actions against Russia in the 1990s and later. It's thanks to that we still have a steel industry in Canada, but we know that it's slow. It's sometimes gamed by our competitors because they know that when an anti-dumping action is launched, it's going to be years until, often years until there's a result. But we have to keep pace, and I think the proposal you mentioned is one of those that needs consideration. We cannot afford to be doing our best and actually making progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. We have lowered them, and even in conditions of strong growth, kept them stable, plateaued them for the first time in Canadian history, and we are committed to reducing them while continuing economic growth. But if the US, Canada, and Europe set these tight, harsh requirements of themselves, and every other jurisdiction in the world does whatever they want, we know what is going to happen to everyone's competitiveness. And so we do want to have this discussion with China, which President Obama has obviously addressed to some extent in recent days. We do want to have it with India, with Brazil, and with the other leading emitters. And we do want to have, ultimately, this is Canada's objective, a global, binding agreement limiting emissions growth, and emissions overall in obligatory ways for all the major emitters in the world.
I just want to add to that. I'm sure you know this, Minister, but Ontario has the lowest greenhouse gas footprint for energy emissions, for energy production of any jurisdiction in North America. Something we're very proud of, very proud of. Minister, thank you very much. Who says you don't have to be young and good looking to be successful in politics? So thank you. The Minister said he's available for a scrum if anybody wants to go after him further. Thank you very much.